There we go. I think that should be pretty good. Yeah, I think that was pretty convincing and making it seem like the camera wasn't already on and recording. All right, before we proceed any further, I think that there is something that needs to be addressed, right? There is an elephant in the room that has to be called out, that's glaringly obvious on this channel. This door is now open instead of being closed. In most of my videos, it's always closed. That's actually where I started doing videos. It's just a closet. So I've been reorganizing comics. That's why you can see there are even more of them around me. I'm in the process of reorganizing stuff. So in the spirit of all of that, I'm going to be reorganizing a little bit on the channel as well. I'm still going to do new comic reviews when I can. I promise I will. But take that for what you will. But I'm also going to be talking about some older comics because recently I was just inspired. I had a sudden flash of inspiration when I was thinking, funny. I had a sudden flash of inspiration when I was just thinking about how I got back into comics back around the time that I was about to graduate from high school. I've always been into superheroes in comics, but around the time of, junior high, high school, or middle school, high school, however you say it, I was a little bit kind of not as into it. There was still an interest, but I wasn't really that into it anymore. And then around the time that I was getting ready to graduate, I got really into it again, mostly because I read an article about Crisis on Infinite Earths, and that made me want to read about all of the Crisis events. Little did I know at the time how many there actually were, and there are even more now. And that's part of the reason why I decided to do this again, because I went all the way back to the beginning and read all of the Crisis events. And yes, I mean all of them, and you're about to see what I mean. So I decided to take that same journey again. Granted, it'll probably be a long one, so it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds on my channel, but we'll keep that going, from here. But I do want to take you all the way back to the very beginning, all the way back to Flash, issue 123. The issue that basically introduced the concept of the multiverse. I want to talk about this book because it is such a pivotal moment in everything. And really, when you look at it, it's kind of leaked out into pretty much every form of entertainment at the moment, where we have all kinds of like movie properties and just different things that all of a sudden have spin-offs that are being chalked up to multiverses so that everything can exist all at the same time. That seems to be the new go-to tactic. So in a way, this went on to influence a lot more than just comics. But we'll kind of we'll see how that plays out. So yes, what I'm going to do is start talking about Flash issue 123. So enjoy this little trip with me all the way back to when Barry Allen first met his hero, Jay Garrick. Okay, now starting out, obviously you can see we have this iconic cover of Flash number 123 that you've more than likely seen, parodied, homaged, whatever the case may be. You've seen this composition before, so you recognize this. But let's get into the story itself. Now we're starting out with this little title splash page, I guess you could call it, and we're just kind of given this first meeting of the heroes as Jay is asking Barry how can he possibly be the Flash when he, Jay, is the Flash and has been for more than 20 years. And then we have all of these different hands just giving us the questions. How many Flashes are there? One? Two? Is Barry Allen the real Flash, or is Jay Garrick? Does the Flash live in Central City or in Keystone City? Only one thing seems certain. Both live on the planet Earth, and only by traveling to that other Earth can the Flash discover his alter ego and become the Flash of two worlds. Now, we're given the immediate setup of Barry Allen on his way to go and meet Iris, and of course, he's running late. This is a running thing for Barry Allen. He's always late. That's the gag. He's the fastest man alive, and somehow he's always late in his normal life. So it's saying at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Barry Allen hurries toward the Central City Community Center. And I just want to say, I'm always nostalgic for panels like this that just take you back to a time when the world still looked like this. Honestly, I wish that cars still looked like this. So Barry's walking in, he says, police work tied me up, but all she'll consider is the fact I was supposed to be there at 12. She's chair lady of the Picture News Orphan Fund group, one of her pet projects, which is definitely a thing that I don't know if people still get into that. Maybe groups just aren't named like that. The Picture News Orphan Fund group. I guess charities like that are probably a little bit different in the way that they name themselves now, but back in the day, this is the kind of thing that you had. Picture News Orphan Fund Group. She's on the stage and she's talking out loud saying he's late. This is just too much. I'll never have anything to do with him again. And of course, Barry's thinking, she has to be complaining about me. So as he's walking up, he's already apologizing and saying that he couldn't help it. He was busy at headquarters, but she says, no, not you. It's that magician who was supposed to be here to entertain the orphans. He hasn't shown up. They'll be terribly disappointed. Then that's when he gets the idea, you know what? I can't stay, but to make amends, how about if I go and call the Flash and tell him to come and fill in for me since, I just saw him over at police headquarters. So, of course, that wins him a little bit of favor with her. And then he goes outside to go and transform himself into the Flash by pressing the little button on his ring that then shoots out his costume, and he transforms into the Flash and runs off thinking, this is the best, I'm going to be a savior to her, so this is going to win me more points. Now we go to when the show has actually started, and she's telling the crowd, sorry, the magician isn't here, but I actually have a very special visit from somebody else. And then she introduces the Flash and says that he's going to be demonstrating some of his spectacular speed stunts. So, of course, everybody is amazed to see him here, except for this kid who looks like he couldn't possibly care less. And he runs up on stage, tells her, why don't you go ahead and join the kids who are now just a sea of floating disembodied heads in a pool of blackness. And he says, I'm going to need the whole stage for my demonstration, which involves playing a game of tennis with myself. So he does that and is telling them that he's the first man in history who can win and lose the same game, which I don't know. I feel like, and granted this may be a technicality, is it really losing or is it just giving up? If you're playing by yourself, don't you just stop playing? How do you really lose to yourself? At least in this game, I'm sure there are other games you can play where you can lose to yourself, but in this one, it's really just deciding not to play anymore. Or, even like missing, for him to even score a point, he would have to slow himself down, wouldn't he? Because how fast is the... Never mind, I'm overthinking it. It says, after an hour of listening to the oohs and ahs of happy children, the Flash prepares to make the most sensational exit in stage history. And he starts telling them about how in India there are fakirs who perform a rope trick using hypnosis, and he's going to do one even better. So he tells them to watch very carefully, and then he throws, the rope up in the air, and it says his hand, rotating so swiftly it cannot be seen, keeps the rope upright in the air. And he's telling them, not only am I going to climb the rope and disappear, but the rope itself will vanish too. And of course, everybody's just looking on, just, of course, in amazement as he does exactly that. He starts to climb the rope, and then all of a sudden there's a pop as he apparently turns into popcorn, I guess. And then he's just gone. Slowly minutes pass and a frown of worry creases Iris West's forehead as the children clamor around her because they're starting to wonder, well, damn it, is he coming back? Was that the end of the show? We don't even get a goodbye. He's just gone. So it's asking the question, what has happened to the Scarlet Speedster? By vibrating his body and twirling the rope at super speed, he disappeared from sight. But where to? Well, of course, we are about to find out, because it says 1 split second after he vanishes from the stage, Flash reappears on a lonely road, staring about in astonishment. And of course, he's wondering where he's ended up, because 1 minute he was in a crowded, community center, and now he's in the middle of nowhere. He says, I could have vibrated so swiftly that I passed through some sort of space warp. I'm outside Central City, I guess, but it won't take me long to get back to the community center stage, and of course, he just takes off running. As he's getting closer, he says, strange, I don't see the memorial tower or the sports stadium. I just hope I haven't gone through some sort of time warp. So first it was a space warp, now we're going through time warps. All at the same time, it's just warp after warp. As he dashes into the community center, he finds it dark and empty. So, yes, this does not look as though there was a show just going on, as these gigantic cobwebs would suggest. But they would suggest you should leave the building at this moment, because whatever spun those webs is a monster. So he takes off and says, now definitely worried, the fastest man alive races cross town. He says, I'll stop by and see Iris, find out what happened. But he's surprised when he runs up and sees this isn't the Picture News building. Instead, the Keystone City Herald building is where it ought to be. What's going on? Where am I? What day is it? So now he runs to go see, well, what day is today, because this is 1961, so he can't just pull out his phone to check. So he goes and runs to the newspaper and sees, well, it's June 14th, 1961. The date is correct, but Keystone City, that's not correct. And that's where he turns to the guy running the newsstand and asks him, where's Keystone City? But the guy, rather than answer the question, says he has a question for him. What are you doing in that getup? He takes off running and says, sorry, no time to answer questions. I've just had a brainstorm. Keystone City, could it be that what I'm thinking is true? He used to live there. So he's starting to catch on, because if you know Barry's inspiration for becoming the Flash originally, it was by reading Flash comics, Jay Garrick. So that's what he's starting to catch on to. That's where he is, and he goes and finds, sure enough, here it is, Jay Garrick, Keystone City. My theory, impossible as it seems, must be true. I'll soon find out. He takes off running to his address and says the Crimson Comet near 78th Street. And then he decides, let me go ahead and get out of my outfit, so that way obviously it doesn't startle anybody. And then, it's kind of telling us how he just has to press the button on the ring, and that just kind of sucks the suit back into it. So very convenient. Then he goes, knocks on the door, and he doesn't introduce himself. He just calls out Jay Garrick, which, if you're me and I open the door and you just immediately tell me my name, I'm going to be more apprehensive of you, not invite you into my home. But Jay Garrick says, you seem to know me, but I don't recall ever meeting you. He says, may I see you in private, please? First off, that's a no. I share a secret known only to you and your girlfriend. That's a double hell no. Joan Williams. And he says, well, go ahead and come in. What? This is the former Joan Williams, now Mrs. Jay Garrick. But what deep secret are you talking about? Before you ask me any questions, he says, let me tell you what I know about you. Back in 1940, Jay Garrick, you were a student at Midwestern University. While working on an experiment in the college laboratory, you accidentally knocked over a retort filled with hard water. You inhaled its fumes. I just want to stop and say for a moment, I remember watching one time a documentary, I can't remember which exact one it was about comic books, but where I believe it was Mark Waid talking about Jay Garrick's origin and how he breathed in the hard water fumes, and he said that that was just ice.
Golden Age Flash got his powers by inhaling the fumes of hard water. Hard water is ice. It's not...
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man? Bro, I'm out, man.
Which is not true. That's not what hard water is. Hard water is basically just, mineral water. Like, it has a lot of extra minerals in it, and it does apparently have health benefits to the human body. So there is some health benefit that can come from ingesting it. I think, like, drinking it. I don't know about inhaling the vapors. I don't know if that would do anything, or if you would literally just be breathing in. Wouldn't that just be steam, just water vapor? Wouldn't it leave the minerals behind? I don't know. Again, maybe I'm overthinking this, but what I am saying is it was kind of out there. I don't know. Maybe back in 1940 they just didn't know what the exact properties of hard water were. I'm not sure what. This is Gardner Fox, the same guy who came up with that. So I don't know where exactly or why exactly, how much he didn't know about hard water. Who knows? But anyway, that was Jay's origin. Originally, they've tried changing that with the New 52. I don't know. We'll see what happens moving forward. Anyway, he's saying, you lay unconscious all night long, breathing in the gases emanating from the hard water. When Professor Hughes found you, you were pretty far gone. So, yeah, again, he's walking in, and the fumes are even green, making it just seem like as if this is like some sort of acid. So, again, just somewhat misleading. It says, after spending some weeks in the hospital recovering, you were emerged in perfect health to become the Flash. You fought crime and criminals and overcame injustice. As he concludes his narrative, Barry sees a strange look pass between Jay Garrick and his wife because, of course, they're a little bit freaked out that he would know all of this. But anyway, this is when he decides, you know what, let me go ahead and let them know about my secret. So he presses the button on the ring that is now somehow white instead of yellow like it's supposed to be. So, of course, they're reacting to seeing a whole ass costume shoot out of this tiny ass ring. And it says, donning the uniform, Barry Allen becomes the Flash. He's telling him, you see, on my Earth, I am also the Flash, just as you are on yours. And I guess he must have been nervous to tell him this because his ear caps and little wing things have become red instead of yellow. I guess, like I said, he was just embarrassed and he didn't know how to react in front of his hero. Jay is a little bit perturbed, obviously saying, two Earths? What are you talking about? He sits down and decides to actually start telling him all of that. And he says, the way I see it, I vibrated so fast, I tore a gap in the vibratory shield separating our worlds. As you know, two objects can occupy the same space and time if they vibrate at different speeds. No, I'm not sure that he knows that for sure, but yeah, just go ahead and throw that out there. He says, my theory is both Earths were created at the same time in two quite similar universes. They vibrate differently, which keeps them apart. Life, customs, even languages evolved on your Earth, almost exactly as they did on my Earth. Destiny must have decreed there'd be a Flash on each Earth. My name is Barry Allen. I'm a police scientist. I live in Central City, which is almost the identical twin of your Keystone City, except for a few details. One night, I too was working on an experiment. Suddenly, a lightning flash hit my equipment, smashing vials of chemicals, bathing me in them, which I guess is a little bit better than hard water because in this one it was just a vague chemicals. We have no idea what they were, but somehow chemicals and lightning were enough to cause this reaction. So, alright, we can accept that one. It says, dazed, I crouched amid the wreckage of those vials and containers dripping from the strange bath I'd been compelled to take. So we know how it happened with Barry Allen. He got doused in the chemicals, hit with the lightning, then he goes outside and he realizes he can run faster than a car, which sets him off on his whole path to become the Flash. And that's where he's telling him that he read about his adventures as the Flash when he was a kid. And Jay is obviously confused, saying, well, how did you read about me? He says, you were once well known in my world as a fictional character appearing in a magazine called Flash Comics. When I was a youngster, you were my favorite hero. A writer named Gardner Fox wrote about your adventures, which he claimed came to him in dreams, which is kind of funny here that Gardner literally, like I said, wrote Jay's story, and now he's getting to insert himself into his own story here about how he created his first hero. So, I mean, you know, in a way, that's a little bit braggadocious. I'm gonna say that, Gardner Fox. I'm gonna give it to you. He wrote a lot of comics, like a lot of comics. Look up his career. He's written a lot of comics. But yeah, this whole thing here of inserting yourself into the story, I'm gonna give it to you. Braggadocious though it was, that was ballsy, and it paid off in a comedic kind of way here. Anyway. He says, obviously when Fox was asleep, his mind was tuned in on your vibratory Earth. That explains how he dreamed up the Flash. The magazine was discontinued in 1949, and they decided to even incorporate that into the whole lore because Jay is saying that's the exact year that I, as the Flash, retired. He's telling him, you know, I had no such ingenious way of getting in and out of my outfit like you. He's saying I usually just threw my costume on and then I had clothes on over that to conceal it. He says, odd that you should appear, you know, just now when I was considering coming back into being the Flash again. He says, I've kept myself in good shape, so there'll be no trouble getting into my outfit. I'm still as fast as ever, though I no longer have my former endurance. Not to the reason why I'm making a comeback. And then he starts telling him about how there have been these recent crimes being committed, so we can see one of them happening here as this money is being taken and is just disappearing, literally disappearing. And then there's a second one where a jewelry store was cloaked in darkness, and even though somebody tried lighting a match and they couldn't even see the flame, and then when the lights came back on, all of their stuff was basically gone. Well, it says the most valuable gems in the store were missing. But if it were me, I would have just taken everything. Why wouldn't you, right? Anyway, not that I'm saying that is not me condoning crime, but I'm just saying were I this fictional character who could do that, I would take everything. Anyway, it say that the third crime was committed when strange, eerie music was heard, and seconds afterward, an armored bank car crashed into a stone wall. So we can see where there are little music notes floating away, and then the guards are starting to come to. It says, while we were unconscious from the crash, somebody broke into the car and looted it. So Jay is telling him that, the police are completely confused. They have no idea what's going on. So I was thinking as the Flash, I might be able to help them out. And then Barry sees that as an opportunity to help out his childhood hero and just says, I'm going to help you out. He says, whoever those crooks are, they're in for double Flash trouble. And that's the end of chapter 1, because comics like this back in the day used to actually have chapters in between. And, a lot of advertisements and whatnot. So the books were a lot thicker. And I miss I have the facsimile edition of this here somewhere. It's literally in one of these boxes, but no, I'm not going to go looking for it right now. So anyway, it says, unknown to either of the two Flashes, in a magnificent room fitted out with stolen treasures sit 3 men, the Thinker, the Fiddler, the Shade, each a master criminal, an avowed foe of the fastest man alive. Already each has committed a robbery. Now they plan more. And this is where we see, yes, these are the characters who are going to be the main headache in this story that is so pivotal in the entirety of DC canon. And yes, one of them is actually the Shade, the character who now appears in the Stargirl series, which is actually pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, I actually do enjoy the Stargirl series. But yes, he's a very, very old villain. He's taken on some morally ambiguous shades in later years, but he started as just a straight up villain. As you can see here, he's literally just robbing people, burgling as it were. Yeah, just a straight up regular generic villain back in the day who was given much more depth in later generations, but that's not always a good thing. Sometimes people try to do that and they don't do it well enough. So it worked with the Shade, doesn't always work with everybody else. Anyway, back to the story. They're sitting here talking about their ill-gotten gains, of course, and also talking about how it was made possible. And it says the Thinker clasps his hands over an odd metal hat. Yes, it's just possible the Flash will come out of retirement to try and stop us, he says. But with this thinking cap, which can cause anything I think of to happen within 50 yards of me, I'm well armed to defeat him. And then the Fiddler lifts his Stradivarius violin and says, more than a dozen years have passed since we saw the Flash. Now that I've improved my fiddle, I'll make myself rich and overcome Flash at the same time. While in jail, we heard nothing about him, but I hope now he hears about us. And then it says the Shade touches the unique cane, which is his own invention, and chuckles. I also improve my cane here, which makes absolute darkness for me. I think, fellow conspirators, we are ready. For every trick the Flash might have, we can go him one better. The Thinker puts on his hat. He says he's off to steal the Neptune Cup from millionaire Edward Jarvis. And then the Fiddler saying, oh, really, like that? Surely you're not going to wear your thinking cap in public. But then he uses it to make it look like just a regular hat. Anyway, he's saying, while you're off to take the Neptune Cup, I'll be on my way to the Keystone Museum. He says the European crown jewels are on display at the museum, but would look much better in our possession, agreed. And then Shade is agreeing with him as he says, as for myself, I'm off to the waterfront, where a collection of historical curios worth millions of dollars lies waiting for my fingers. And then we go back over to the Flashes as the Flash, Jay, is getting ready. He says, not as spectacular as your ring, Barry, but effective enough in its own way. And he's telling him how he's excited, to be going off with his boyhood hero, which, as I'm saying that right now, sounds a little bit creepy, but it might just be the way that I said it. Anyway, so they take off and they decide, okay, let's go ahead and split up. And then later they're going to meet up back at Jay's house. And then we see where the Thinker is showing up at the Jarvis estate. And he says, I gained my or he's thinking to himself, I gained my reputation by thinking out my crimes to the minutest detail. I even planned how to use those watchdogs to help me overcome the Flash. And then he's able to mentally dominate the watchdogs and telling them when the Flash shows up that they need to tell him what's happening inside the house, which is an odd flex. But then again, this is how the villains were back in the day. They would do shit like that, like train dogs to literally tell the hero, yes, I'm in there. Tell him everything that I'm doing. He goes in and is welcomed in by the butler because of his thinking cap. So he's invited in. He goes in and he sees Mr. Jarvis standing there. He says, "You're here to steal the Neptune cup? A pleasure, sir, to be robbed by you. Allow me to show you where the cup is." And then he goes and we see that it is actually a very nice cup, a little bit ostentatious for my taste, but okay, whatever. So he's saying it's a beautiful piece of workmanship. Now leave me alone so I may admire it. Anyway, as Jade just happens to be running by this place, the dogs do stop him and tell him, the Thinker's inside stealing the Neptune cup. He's a little bit confused because he's like, am I hearing those dogs talking, especially about the Thinker? So he decides, okay, well, the last I heard of the Thinker, he was in jail, but only he could have dreamed up such a bizarre touch to a crime like this. Says this means he's expecting me, so I'll run so fast I'll go through the wall without harming it and surprise him. And then a moment later, he runs in and sees him about to take the cup and says, "Caught you, Thinker, right in the act. You're going back to jail to stay." But then all of a sudden he sees, wait a minute, he's behind me. He's not in my hands. And he's wondering, well, how the hell did he get away from me? Of course, he runs to go and catch him. He says, "I got you this time. You're not going to get away." And then just like out of a cartoon, he's not there yet again. He's behind him. So he says, "I don't understand. I must have slowed down tremendously." And then we see where he's doing this whole thing of trying to catch him multiple times to the point that he just exhausts himself. And then once he's too tired to run anymore, that's when the Thinker actually comes out and says, "You know what? It was actually pretty fun watching you just tire yourself out trying to catch these mental projections of me." Anyway, he says, "I've decided to let you live so you can furnish me with more amusement at a later date. Now that I've had my fun and the Neptune cup, I'll bid you farewell." And he's saying, no, you're not going to get away. As his quarry leaves, though, the Crimson Comet spurts forward. "I've got to summon up what's left of my strength. Overtake him," he says, but no. He says, "I'll slam the door shut with mental energy." And just as the Flash reaches the doorway, he says, or he's thinking to himself, "Took me by surprise, had no chance to vibrate through. I'm blacking out because he closed the door." Now we go back over to check on Barry, who is running along a dock where he sees that there's just a private yacht that's enveloped with black clouds. So of course he's confused and decides, let me go and investigate that because that surely can't be normal. And then we see in the captain's cabin where the Shade is there and he says, "My special contact lenses enable me to see in this deep darkness. This is the last of the historical curios which are valued at over $5 million. Whatever the hell it is. It looks like some sort of dragon figurine, I suppose." And then anyway, we see where the Barry has shown up and he's just groping along in the darkness thinking to himself, "I can't keep groping like this. I've got to get rid of this darkness so I'll know what's going on." That's where he decides to start running around in a circle to create this whirlpool vortex effect, and it just creates a tornado that carries all the darkness away. And then we see where the Shade caught on to that and decides, oh shit, I better cheese it because only the Flash could have done something like that. So let me just get the hell out of here. Within a few seconds, Barry's run through the whole ship and sees, well, there's nobody here. And he says, the historical curios to be exhibited in this country are gone. And that speedboat has a man in it who looks suspiciously like a villain I once read about in the old Flash comics, the Shade. He says, "Yes, Flash, I'm here, the Shade. But you look different than you used to. How come?" He says, "You'll find out after I catch you." And then that's where he starts running to catch him. But then he decides he has another weapon up his sleeve, and that's where he uses his cane to shoot oil with the darkness that he shoots out. And of course the oil mixes with the water it doesn't really mix with the water, it sits on top of the water and causes Barry to slip, and then he's not able to run anymore. Having lost both of the villains, they reconvene to lick their wounds and kind of talk about, well, we kind of, cocked it up working on our own. Why don't we try working together to get the third guy? That way we can feel a little bit better about ourselves.
She's scared.
It says, together, New Flash and Old Flash streak out to take up the challenges of the super criminals, uniting as a duo for the very first time. But unknown to the Flash pair, a startling surprise awaits them when they come to grips with the last of the villainous trio, the Fiddler. This is where we go over to Chapter 3. And that's where we have the Fiddler, who's on his little fiddle car or violin car. Well, it says fiddle car, so okay. And it's under automatic controls, mind you. The eerie music from his Stradivarius causes odd accidents to happen ahead of him, which will happen when you're just playing a violin or fiddle very loudly and very badly. Because, I mean, look, he's breaking all the glass. My God. We see where the flashes are running up and they see that, there's construction work up ahead and someone's in trouble. This is where we actually get one of those rare moments where the iconic cover does actually happen in the comic itself. So we see where, one of the construction workers is about to be hit by a girder, and then the two flashes are running. It's actually Jay who does help the civilian. Not because he's faster necessarily, because as we know, Barry is the faster Flash, but more so because Barry's the one who's going to try and stop the girder, and he does that by doing the whole little like fan thing with his arm to, blow it away. The construction worker is telling them the girder fell when strange music, like from a violin, was heard. I sprained my ankle when I ran to get out of its way. I couldn't move. And then that's when Jay puts it together and says, strange violin music. Well, that can only be the fiddler. And we see where they take off running to the Keystone City Museum, which is where he is. And that's where he's saying, there's his fiddle car. Nobody'd notice it here. The museum's in such an out-of-the-way place. He must be inside. Okay, they might not notice it here, but they had to have noticed it driving over there, right? I mean, there's no way this thing went unnoticed. And as I'm looking at it, I have to wonder two things. Number one, who does he possibly have riding in the back seat? Number two, how does he manage any type of dip in this car? You know what I mean? With like the long neck of the thing, this has to just be snapping off all the time that he hits like any kind of dip or anything like that, because unless it has some sort of bend in it where it can fold, but I doubt that it does. It would have to be like a tractor trailer type of situation, but it doesn't look like that type of thing. Anyway, now that we're done overthinking things again, we see where they run into the building as he's just standing there menacingly playing the violin. It says he's not just fiddling around here for the love of it, that's for sure. Meanwhile, at the Crook's secret hideaway, we see where the Thinker and the Shade are kind of just standing there talking about how they both beat the Flash, but the Shade is talking about how he looked younger and he wore a different costume. But the Thinker says, you know what, you have to be losing your mind. He wasn't wearing a different costume. He was wearing the exact same one, and he looked the same as he always does. A little bit slower, a little bit older, but it's still the same. And he says, wait a minute. There's only one answer. There have to be two of them now. If that's the case, the Fiddler may be in double trouble. So, of course, they decide, shit, we better go help him because he's probably going to get his ass handed to him by the two of them. So they run over to the museum as well, thinking we're here to help. And he says, hold on. It's okay, I got this. I've already taken care of the whole thing. Watch. As I'm playing my violin, I've been able to make them dance like my puppets. He's saying by Erebus, they're not only dancing, they're actually stealing the jewels for you. He says, yes, you two Flashes, never mind those little individual gems. Just bring me the big jewel treasures, the crowns and scepters. Again, why not just take everything? If you're gonna be here, not that I'm condoning or encouraging, but if you're gonna be here, take everything, It says, helpless before the overpowering music, the twin Thunderbolts fill their hands with priceless objects and bring them to the Fiddler. He says, you see, they are powerless to resist my musical commands. Enough of this. I have the prized jewels, and we've taught both Flashes our power. To make certain they don't bother us for a while, I'll freeze them solid for 24 hours. So he starts playing, I guess, a special song that's supposed to do that. And he says, that'll hold them. Now let's get out of here. But as the Fiddler and his cohorts turn to leave the museum, all of a sudden the Flashes just run towards them. He says, they're free? I better give them a heavier dose. As the old, in quotation marks, Flash races past the Shade, he sends him whirling. He says, you're really in the dark now, Shade. You're spinning so fast you can't see a thing. And it says, simultaneously, the other Flash grasps the Fiddler's hands and moves them so swiftly that he basically puts his hands through the violin. And then he's saying that it's probably the first musical handcuffs in the long history of crime, which I guess, yeah, probably. And then anyway, they both use their super speed to disassemble the Thinker's cap before he can actually have a thought. And minutes later, they have them taken to the police station where they're already being booked. And the Fiddler's confused. He's just like, I don't understand. How did you overcome the fiddle? And Jay explains it by saying, like all crooks, you made a mistake, Fiddler. We were forced to obey you, but you neglected to order us not to try and escape. Ah, yes, there it is. The old convention, the old Deus Ex Machina in the old comic books, the old genie's logic of, well, you made a wish, but you didn't tell us not to try and escape. You may have wished for $10 million, but you didn't wish not to lose it by the end of the day. So anyway, we see where Barry is saying that they picked up the tiny gems that he didn't want, and then rather than throwing them away like he said, they went ahead and put them in their ears, and that was enough to distort the pitch of the music just enough that it didn't affect them any longer. Later on, they find a spot outside of Keystone City where they're just kind of standing there talking, and Barry is telling him, "This is where I vibrated into your world, Jay. It's time now to return to my own. I hope you can visit me someday." He says, "Maybe I will, Barry. Now that I've come out of retirement, I think I'll go on being the Flash." And it says the old Flash watches the new Flash vibrate faster and faster until he blurs out of sight. He says, "So that's how he does it. I'm going to have to remember that so I can visit his Earth sometime." And then we see where, yeah, he shows up back in Central City on the stage of the community center, and he sees, "Oh crap, everybody's gone. I've been gone for multiple hours. I better go and look for Iris and give her some sort of explanation for what happened." So he takes off and sees that, yeah, the Memorial Tower and the sports stadium are still there, and there's the Picture News building up ahead. So he runs in and tells her, basically what happened. She says, "That's all you can tell me, Flash? That you took off on a most unusual case? I'm sure our readers would like to hear what happened." And he says, "Iris, honestly, if they read it in your newspaper, they'd say it was pure fiction. The only ones who'd really believe it would be the readers of Flash comics. That's why I'm going to look up Gardner Fox, who wrote the original Flash stories, and tell it to him. He can write the whole thing up in a comic book." And that must be how the whole thing happened. So yeah, that's how it happened. That's the story, and I'm sticking to it. But moreover, I wanted to do this story examining that because many times we tend to talk about pivotal moments like this, like Flash 123, that birthed the idea of a multiverse into comics and everything like that. We tend to reference it to talk about it and the impact that it had. Very rarely do we actually talk about the story. The story itself, like I pointed out in a few parts, it was lacking in a few things. The art could have been better here and there. The story was a little bit wonky, and like I said, it uses genie logic in the way that they overcome the whole thing. But it is important to the overall canon of DC Comics because of what it went on to contribute just by the ideas that it put together here. And I think that it's a double-edged sword. I like stories like this, and I don't like them at the same time. I like stories like Elseworld stories and What If type of stories because they're fun stories to explore. I don't like when we try to establish that as a whole separate type of thing or try and bring it into just a main canon. Whatever. Doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I wanted to talk about this particular story because, like I said, I think that's what needs to be happening. And that's what I'm going to be doing with this particular series. I'm just going to be talking about the comics that happen within these pivotal moments, these big, universe, multiverse, omniverse, shattering, shaking, just redefining events. I want to talk about the stories themselves. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. And with this one, I mean, if not for that particular thing, introducing that, I guess, concept, if not for that, this story would probably have just been forgotten like so many other issues of Flash comics. You know what I mean? Would somebody else have come up with the idea at some point? I'm pretty sure somebody already had somewhere. I'm sure that there's some sort of evidence of something that somebody's going to point to that, yeah, they already had that idea for something like that. But as far as we know, this was the first time that it became a thing into, I guess, the mainstream. And like I said, it's gone on to influence so many other things where we have all kinds of other stuff. So, I mean, in a way, it ended up becoming, it lives up to its legacy in that way because it does have that in there, and it's a really cool trick that they pulled in the story, and it went on to be a thing for a very long time. Now they have different ways of traveling between universes and multiverses. It seems to just happen at will. But for a while, there was a lot of thought that went into how do characters travel, because for the Flashes, it was fairly easy. They could just change the way that they vibrated, and then and that was the end of the story. But yeah, for everybody else, they had to actually think, well, how is this character going to get from here to there? And they had ways of going about that. Nowadays, like I said, it's just whatever. They have all kinds of different ways of traveling to and from all these different places. So it's grown into a much bigger thing. And I often wonder when Gardner Fox wrote this story, did he ever in a million years consider that it could ever blossom into something like this? He did. I don't remember when it was exactly he died. I think sometime in the 80s, 90s, something like that. I can't remember when exactly he died. So I don't know how much of it he saw actually, bloom into other stuff and what his thoughts of it might have been. I should probably look that up at some point. I probably should have looked it up before doing this video. But here we are anyway. So, yeah, that's going to do it on this particular video. Look forward to me doing more of this. I have, like I said, a lot of this material. I'm going to be looking for my hard drive that has a lot of these comics saved back in the day when I had to use them, when I had to get them using a particular program that's very harmful to computers. But back in the day, that was kind of the only way for me to find comics. So, because I was just from a very poor little rural town, so there was no comic book store, and I didn't really know people who went to comic book stores, so I didn't really go to comic book stores. Yeah, until I was like an adult, pretty much. That was when it started. But anyway, yeah, we're going to take this journey together, so I hope you're looking forward to it, because I'm kind of excited for it. But we'll see what's going to happen. One thing I'm not excited for is the editing I'm going to have to do on this video. I know that. It's going to take a very long time. Unfortunately, even I didn't realize just how long it would take to edit this one video. It has taken so long, you guys. But unfortunately, that's the trade-off when you have more responsibilities in the day job and less time to devote to the YouTube stuff. But it's okay. We're going to get this figured out together. But well, that's what we have to do. I needed to put content on this channel. It's been a very long time, and I apologize for that. But we'll do what we can to change that. I guarantee it. So anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this particular video. Feel free to share your thoughts with me on just Flash 123, the multiverse in general, I guess, if you want. Try. I have a lot of the same gripes many of you do, so I get it. I understand the frustration, but feel free to share with me your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you liked it and do all the stuff. I don't really know what it is that helps the algorithm anymore, so just do whatever you want. And if you're done here, then go and read a book, please. And if not, then I'll see you on my next video.